All right, so when I talk about management overview, I'm talking about all the configuration of the device, administration, management. So you can go in there and do some modifications either to the configuration, look at the status, get reports, and so there's a lot of things you can do with this management interface, and everything that it includes. Of course, the big one of the big part of the management interface is our what we call our web portal. So it's just a browser interface where you can go on the system and change the configurations, do backups, and all these kinds of things here. But it shows you all the information you can get from the system. Then I want to go through the configuration or provisioning overview. Just see what are the items we want to configure for a H248 or signaling gateway type system for an application with the Metaswitch environment. Then I can show you the status overview. So what you can see on the system, everything you can see, and you can have high level information, and then you can dig pretty deep to get the status information. And the RESTful API overview, finally, I forgot to remove it from here, but we will do this on the last day, and we will have a full explanation on the RESTful APIs. So let us start here with the management overview. So yesterday, we left off somewhere here where once you have installed the system and you did the initial configuration, so this is mostly just giving an IP to the management interface, then you can log into this web interface with the management IP and a port. So this is the default port we need to put to access the system. The port can be changed, and also if you need to use HTTPS, this can be changed as well. It's just the default configuration is HTTP. The default password here I showed yesterday is root. You can of course change these password later on. So initial page, you get to the what we call the welcome page, and it gives you information, global information on the system when it was started the last time, then the current time that you have on the system, which could be different than your time, since you can configure the dates and time zones. Versions, type of host, and who is logged in on the system. And then on the left side here, you have like different segments. The segment up here is like a global segment, so you can get the status of the whole system. You can do backups of the environment, and then here system is to activate new configuration or upgrade the system to new version. Then down here you have configurations. So this is provisioning the system. You can have different types of configuration, and each of the elements here can be configured in the system. It's optional. Some of them are optional. Some of them are mandatory. So I will explain that later. And on the bottom of the left panel here, you have maintenance. And I will explain the elements you have here. But here, what we want to show is web users. So if you want to change the user credentials or add some of them, you can do this here. You have, when you click on web users, you have three settings here: web users itself, web user groups, and then some security settings here. So the web users here, you can just add new users and passwords, but you need to choose here the user groups. And the user groups are explained. I didn't show the user groups here. Okay, so you have here, for each of the elements that you see in the navigation pane here on the left side, you have the type of groups you want to use. Okay, so you have the default mode is read write, so a user have access to all the elements here. You can have users that have read only option, so you can choose, let's say for example, if you want to only read the status, only look at the backups that were done on the system, so you can't do any modifications here. So this is, for example, a read-only user. So You can do here apply all, and then you choose read in the drop-down menu, and then all of them will be read. So you will have a read-only user that you can use here and when you create a new user. And the last one here is no access. So when you choose this option, this removes completely the element here on the left side. So you don't even see it for a user that logs in. So you can just hide some of the elements from the left panel here for a specific user. Okay. Security settings here. I didn't show a snapshot of the security setting, but it's mostly that the expiry time of your login. Okay, so the default is 30 minutes, but I usually change it for 8 hours or more. So you don't get kicked out if you don't access the web portal. So here I will come back to these ones a bit later, but here we jump into the configuration section, which is the main section to provision all the system with the what this device will do. Each of the configurations are shown here. So this one here and this one here is the active configuration. Right? So this is the one that you're currently using, but you can have also other configurations here, which in fact could be completely different configuration. So for example, you could have here a configuration that is H248 connected to a media gateway controller. And you could have another configuration here, which is a signaling gateway. So then, for example, you just pass an MTP2 link to M2 UA, two different configuration in the same system. If you switch from one to the other, it's going to change completely the behavior of the system. If you combine the two configurations in the same one, then you will have H248 and the signaling gateway in the same system. System name is always the same. So we now use only one system name. It's like the global configuration of the whole system. If you click here on configure now, you will it will appear here on the left side to know what you are currently configuring in the system. So for example, if you want to start configuring this device, you can do here configure now. And you can also copy a configuration to create another one. Here, the updated is when it was either you create a new element in the system or you save an element, meaning you modified it. So for example, if you add a new T1, then it will change the updated value, but it may not have been activated right away. So this depends on if you have activated the configuration. So every time you do a change in the configuration, it will update the database, but it will not apply the configuration right away. You need to activate that configuration to push the change. When you add the elements, like for example, you have one T1 in the system, and then you add, and this T1 is activated and running, and then you add another T1, and you will see this updated. So then the configuration was changed, and then you activate it. The new T1 will be added to the configuration without an effect on the rest of the system. All right, so you'll just have one more T1. All the other lines will have been created. There's no restart of the system, no reboot or anything like that. So it just adds the new T1s. If you add a new MTP2 link, it's just going to be added. If you add new bits clock interface, we see here. So they're just added, and this doesn't affect the rest of the system. Of course, if you remove a T1 from the configuration, then it will affect. If you add some calls on that T1 and you remove it from the configuration, it will stop having calls on this T1. But if you add some information to the configuration, if you change it, it's going to be okay as well. In the web portal, you will see at some place, some of them are marked as service affecting parameters. So if you see service affecting parameters and you change these values, well, there will be a restart of the, for example, the H248 stack. So normally these settings, you put them at the beginning, the first time you configure the system, and then you don't change them later. There's other parameters which are not service affecting, which can also be changed live in the system. Okay. So like I was explaining, you can do modification to the configuration. And then once you're ready to, once you did all your changes, you're ready to activate the configuration, you can go here in system and then choose the correct configuration in the drop-down box. You will see all your configuration will be there. And then you do here activate. An activation will apply, load all the new changes that were done in the configuration, compare with what was there before, and then apply the new changes that were set on the system. So it will load the database configuration, and then will run with that new configuration. You can also validate the configuration like this here. So you can just select it and put here validate. When you do this, it will just verify that the information that you input in the provisioning makes sense. Right? So there's a lot of things that the system can see if it was configured correctly or not. But for example, if you put an IP address and you put the wrong IP address, then you won't know what IP address, if the IP address is good or bad, right? But there's other things that the web portal can check, make sure that the configuration is correct. This is useful when you're doing changes that you don't want to apply right away. So maybe, for example, you're adding a new MTP2 link, but you know that the MTP2 link will not be ready in the network yet. So you don't want to allocate it and then being shown as down in the configuration. But you know that later tonight, the service provider will bring up the link as well. So you can prepare that configuration in a new one. For example, you see here 3.15.22, and you can put, for example, MTP2, just to say that there's a new MTP2 link here that you have created. So you can validate it here, and then everything looks okay on our system. And then later on, you can go here, choose MTP2, and then activate this configuration. And if the service provider has also brought up the MTP2 link, you will see it come up. Okay. Just to repeat here, when you do activate configuration, it will do a validate before activating it. So if ever there's a mistake in the configuration, it won't apply it. It will let you fix the problem first. And then if it's fixed, it's going to activate. So if you look internally here, I want to explain just a little bit how it works. We talked about this slightly yesterday. The TMG systems are built in two different layers. One is a internal host, and we said yesterday it's running right now CentOS 7 in those internal hosts. And you have another portion, which is the telecom hardware, which runs the TDM links, the voice over IP, DSPs, and interfaces, all the TDM interfaces here, plus signaling, so that if you have your M2 UA, MTP2 installed here, and the media. So you really have two different portions in the system, and you have an internal connection between those two systems. When you connect to the internal host here, you can see those connections. When we get to the troubleshooting section, I will explain this more in details. Now, on the internal host here, that's where you run the web interface. So this will be your connection to the system here. It has the configuration database, which is a MySQL database, which works perfectly well for us. And you have OAM application here. This OAM application is used to make sure that all the application gets updated at the same time, same version. Also the telecom hardware version. So it verifies that everything is running at the same level. And then you have all the other applications running on the system to manage the calls, H248 interface, SNMP, traps and stuff like that. So when you do your activate configuration, what it does, it will send a request to the web portal, which in turn sends a request to the OAM application here. The OAM application tells all the applications here to resynchronize, and each of the application will go in the configuration database, compare what is different from the previous configuration to the new one, and will apply it right away if it needs to change something. All right, so for example, if there's a new MTP2 link into the system, here there will be a check and say, oops, there was only one MTP2 link here. So it will send commands to the telecom hardware here to add a new MTP2 link at the telecom hardware level. So this is all done automatically and takes only a few seconds to do that. So we will come back to this drawing also later. And just before I continue, so I talked about activate configuration, but in different places where you have states, you could see something like apply states. And I just want to make the difference between activate configuration and apply states. When you do apply states, it will send the command straight from the web portal to the different applications here. So it doesn't put anything in the configuration database. It only tells the application what it needs to do. So when you see in the web interface apply states, this will apply the function immediately. And one example of this is having a T1 line, and you want to do a line loopback test on the T1 line. So you can go in the web portal, look at that T1, and then bring down that or do the loopback on the T1 to do a test. Once the test is complete, you just change it back to normal and apply state again. So apply states done immediately applies the state that you have changed in the web interface. Again, we'll come back to that later and I will show you, or Joshua will show you. So different configurations, and here I just want to explain the way to configure the system to make it as efficient as possible. You can change the active configuration. So a very, very simple case, you have one configuration, you go in the web portal, you go in that configuration and you modify that configuration. So you will have a modified configuration here. So you will have a little star, meaning that it's being modified. And you do a validation maybe on this configuration and you see it's good. So there's no errors in the configuration. So when you do your activate configuration, it will become config A again. So no change in the configuration and everything will be fine. You do this when you have changes that are, let's say, simple and not very, the risk of changing something is very low. And for example, you have an IP, you put a wrong IP, you can just go in the configuration, change to the correct IP and reapply, and that's fine. What I want to show here is that in case of failure, so for example, you change a configuration and you make some kind of mistake in the configuration. So for example, some cases of misconfiguration, sometimes it's when you don't add, for example, I think in IUA, if you configure IUA and you don't put your IUA in a network access point, which we'll show later, it may fail. All right, so there's some cases like this which will be captured by the web interface and will be set as invalid. So what you do is you modify this configuration, but you make a mistake, right? Something that is not accepted by the web system, and it will say, well, you can't do this right now. So if you do a validate here, it's going to be invalid. Right? So you will have an invalid configuration. And then if you try to do activate, well, it won't work because it will do your validate first and it will say that your configuration, well, it's still config A, but it's invalid. So your changes that you have made are not applied. However, the changes are still in the config A, right? So your changes are there, and you know they are not good. So usually when you get an error in the configuration, it's going to tell you what type of error it is, and you can go back and fix it. But let's say it's you're not the one that did that change. Maybe it was done yesterday by someone else. You're not sure what was changed, or you're a bit stuck with this non-working active configuration here. Okay? So you really need to go back in the configuration and fix that change that was done. One way to know what was changed, well, if you did the change right now, you can easily go back, but maybe you can go in the audit logs and see what was changed there. Okay? So I'll show you the audit logs later. So to prevent getting into that scenario where you have a configuration that was changed and you don't know if it's good, you can do something like this. So you can work with multiple configurations. You will have your active configuration that you can copy to a new name. You can then modify this configuration with the changes you need. You can validate this configuration, make sure that it is good. Once you know that it's good, you can then activate this configuration, and then your new configuration will be config B like this, and it's going to be fine. If you make a mistake in this configuration B and you validate it and it's not working, well, it's fine because you will be still on config A and it will still be valid. And if you want to make other changes, you'll be able to do that as well. And you have as much time as you want to fix this validation case here. The other way to do that, of course, is to keep a copy. So you can put a backup and then change the active configuration here, continue with the change of config A. If that works, you can just apply it and it's fine. If it doesn't work and you can't fix the problem, well, you can just go back and activate the config B, which will be exactly the same as config A, and that will work as well. Okay, and here, of course, I put config A, config B, but usually we try to put some meaningful names here, what was added recently, the date of the configuration, maybe who changed it, stuff like that. So we can be efficient. So in the to know what was changed, you can go in the audit log. So you can click here in the maintenance section log, and you have two sections. One is audit log, one is system logs. This one is not necessary anymore since we have our reporting tool here. So you can still go there, but it's not super useful. The report tool is much better. In the audit logs, you can see here a list of events that occurred on the system. So you can see every time there was a change done in the system, you can see which configuration was changed. You can see who changed it, what was changed, which resource was modified, the name of the resource. And if you click on show at the end here, you will see the changes. So you will have the old values, the new values. So you see exactly what was changed in the system. You can see also, because one of the problems we see with new users is that you have, for example, you do a add port range like this, and you put the information, but then you forget to do your activate configuration. So here you can see every time the configuration was activated to see when the changes were applied and by whom. And of course, here you can filter which configuration was changed and all these filters here. So it can be very useful. This audit log can be extracted as well. So you can, at the bottom here, you have an export of this list, and then you can do a search in that list of what was changed at what time. Backup and recovery. So you can Once you have done your configuration that you know is stable and is working, it's a good idea to do a database backup. So you can do a database backup manually. So you get on the system, you click on the backup I showed before. We could add it here. So you can do click on backups here, and then you create new database backup. This will create a new file in the section manual database backup, because we just did create here. And you see here, it creates a file, which is a SQL file of the system. And then it has the version that it's running and the time and date it was created. So it will create, it just does a backup of the database, current database that we have. You can, of course, rename it to give it a meaningful name here. You can download it. You can download it here by clicking this option. And of course, delete here, and I will show validate in a minute. So this is this file, when it's created, it's stored on the disk of the internal host. So that's the CentOS 7 that is running there. And so if you connect to the device and you go to this path, you will see these are where the database backups are. So they're stored locally. So of course, if you keep them there and for some reason the unit becomes unavailable, then you will lose that database backup. So if you do a download, then you can get it out of the system. And we can do also an automated backup. Okay, so then it can be, this database backup can be done at a specific frequency and then sent outside of the system. So the system backup, when you do create backup, it includes many things in from the system. So it will read from the database and get all the configuration. So not only the latest configuration, but all of them from the system. It will also have all the audit logs that were captured in the system and all the users. Okay? So on the system, there's two sets of access. One is from the SSH console. So then you have a user for the SSH, and you have users from the web interface. These are two separate elements. The users from the web interface are here in the user list. So if you load a database on a new system and you have created users with specific type of access, then they will also be in that new system. Okay. And like I said, it creates a SQL file. There is some things that it does not include. So when you do a system backup, you don't get the management IP of the device. Okay, so the management IP you saw, we connect initially, you put an IP on the system, you can connect a web portal there. But if you take that database backup, put it on another system, it won't change the management IP, the default management IP that you configured initially. And to be precise, if you created new management interfaces in the web portal, these will be ported to the new system. Right, so there's the base management interface from management 0 that doesn't change, doesn't move, and it's per unit, not in the database backup. And then you have the additional management interfaces that you can create in the system if you wish, and these will be in the database. If you have created console commands on the internal host, they will not be in the system database backup because it's not stored in the SQL configuration. It's just on the disk. So if you do special commands, and one example of these commands is the automated backup procedure. So if you want to do this, you need to just modify a file on the system, and you start a cron job, and this will schedule a database backup on the system every day or every week to get the configuration and push it on an external system. Okay. But this cron job will not be on a new system that you have. You need to you will need to redo this automatic backup procedure on the new system. To recover a backup, so you can recover the backup on the same system. So for whatever reason you want to reload the configuration, you can do that, or you can do that on another system. So if you get a new system which has similar configuration, you can take that backup, load it on the system. And we saw the load just before here. Yes, upload database backup here. So you can just choose the file and do upload. So this will put the database backup into the system. And then you need to do validate here. So validate will just verify that the file is really a Telco Bridges compliant file. And then once it's ready, it will put here valid, so it has been validated. And you can then do recover on the system. So this will allow you to replace all the configuration and use that new environment on this system. So there's more than one way to do this. Like I was explaining yesterday. So either you completely configure the system manually, either you load a database backup from another system, which starts with a framework of already configured items, or you can use the RESTful API to configure the system. And this is up to you to decide. Up this side. I need to switch these two slides. Upload the database backup. All right. So I want to do here now a configuration overview. So all the elements that can be configured in the system. And here I'm trying to focus more on the Metaswitch integration of what needs to be configured in the system. So you see here on the top side, you have your configurations and you will have your, here it's your main configuration. So everything below here will be included into this configuration here. First element here are hardware units. So let's say by default, when you get a new device in your system, the device will already be there. So you will have one hardware unit, which is actually here what you see is the telecom portion of the system. Right? So this will be the serial number of the telecom portion of the system here. And you have on there almost nothing to configure. If you want to change low-level telecom settings, you can do this here. But normally, we don't need to do much here. If you have a 1+1 configuration, it will show like this 2 units. So initially, when you get the device, you will see only 1 unit. So let's say, for example, you get the unit, you configure it as primary, you will see only the first device here in your system. But as soon as you connect the secondary device in the same environment, the secondary device will appear here. And the configurations that will be done here will be applied to both systems. Okay, so everything that will be changed, if you add a new TDM line, ISDN CAS, it will be applied to both devices viewed as one unit. Okay, but normally here we don't have much to do, but we'll still show you a few things. You can see the status of these devices and other things like that. First thing we show here is the signaling gateway configuration. So here what we want to have is a signaling gateway information, so TDM information and IP information, SIGTRAN information to be sent. So what we want to configure here is first the IP interfaces. All right, so IP interfaces will be which Ethernet port you are using. So like I explained yesterday, most of the time we use VoIP 0, VoIP 1, but it's not mandatory to do that. So we have VoIP 0, VoIP 1 here as Ethernet port. You can choose the VLAN that you want to use for this particular type of connection and the IP address and the service type, right? So if you want to use SIGTRAN for this link, then you just need to specify, well, this IP, this VLAN, these ports will be used for SIGTRAN traffic. You then have here your TDM line interfaces. All right, so this will be your configuration. So here I'm showing just T1, but you have all the types that can be available, T1, DS3s, OC3s, or any type of interface here. So you need to configure your TDM line interface and your MTP2 links, because it's a signaling gateway configuration here, which T1 and time slot will the MTP2 links be. So most of the time it's a 64 kilobit per second link, but on some networks it could be also a 56 kilobit per second. One of the bit is used for other services. And the SIGTRAN part here, oops, this is the MTP2 here. And then the SIGTRAN part, well, there's two things. All the SIGTRAN goes over SCTP, right? SCTP is a variant of TCP connections where you can have multiple streams in the same connection, right? So TCP has only one connection end-to-end. SCTP can have multiple connection in the same socket configuration. But again, the CTP, the configuration is just which IP interface. So which IP interface I had configured here, and the port we will be using for communicating with the M2 UA, the other side of the M2 UA. Okay, so this is your local configuration. And then you will have your M2 UA here, which will be the remote configuration. So remote IP, remote port. The only other information you need in M2 UA is the link ID. And the link ID will be your relationship between the M2 UA information and the MTP2 information. So you get MTP2 signaling information coming in, you put it. So then it's called here a link ID that you can have to make the relationship between the two. You will see later when we configure M2 UA, it's very simple to do that. For IUA, if you need to use ISDN PRI configuration, so you will need to do the same thing, an IP interface for this type of traffic, which could be the same as the one you had configured before, or it could be a different IP interface, depends on the network you are using. Your TDM line interface, you will need to have what type of TDM line this is, could be T1 or E1 here. And then you have SCTP. You still need to configure this for IUA. And in IUA here, we will configure both the TDM side and the IP side at the same time. So because the only information we need from the TDM side is which ISDN primary rate variant do we have. And it will also here have a link ID. So the media gateway controller can know which IUA or which ISDN PRI we are controlling now. And the remote IP and port, this is of the media gateway controller. So these are the information we need to capture if we want to configure IUA on the system. Then we have the H248 configuration. So this is more like the media gateway configuration. So what we need to configure here is still the IP interface, but in this case, we want to say it's for H248. So which interface will we use for connecting to the media gateway controller signaling? And there will be another interface for RTP traffic, which normally in this case, it is a different interface, which could be on the different VLAN with a different IP address here. All right, so you need to define two network interfaces for the H248 media gateway application. Then here you need to configure your TDM line interfaces. So here again, you would have your OC3 or STM1 or different type of interface here, which framing and coding you will be using for these interfaces. So you can normally when we go into the DDM line interface, we will configure all of them at once. So for example, on your OC3, if you have your 84 T1s in there, you would configure the OC3 line interface, the sub section of the OC3 plus all the T1s that you have in the system. So again, we will show you how to do this later this week. The other elements we need to configure for H248, one is the clocking, which can also be name synchronization. So here we just need to specify which sources we want to use for TDM synchronization. It could be the OC3 interface we configured before. It could be the T1s, could be the E1s, or the bits ports. Right? So we can configure, we can choose a bits port as a source of clock synchronization. So this is actually just a list of clock source you want to use in the system. And depending on the architecture of the system, we may want to choose one or another of a clock source. We have another element here that's called the profiles. So profiles can allow you to configure specific things, just like what you have on the media gateway controller. So you have some profiles. There is one profile that is created for telco bridges into the Metaswitch configuration. So you can choose this profile in the Metaswitch configuration. Plus, you can also have a profile on the TNG device. Me and Joshua are currently working on the best profile to make sure everything works. So that's going to be pretty easy. But for example, you could change the codec selection that are allowed on the system. So for example, if you don't want to have G729 into your configuration, you can just remove it from the default codec profile, and then you're sure that it won't choose G729 as a codec for the RTP stream. Here again, the H248 tones are all automatic. They're all pre-configured in the system, and it will work by itself. But if you want to, for some reason, change those tones, let's say announcement tones or dial tones or these things, it's possible to change them here. Then you have your network access points. This is very easy for H248 configuration. You only need to assign the TDM lines that you want to H248 and the voice over IP ports. So normally it's just one-to-one, so very simple. Then you have your H248 configuration here, which has a bit more information to fill in. One is the media gateway controller IP, so where you will send the information. One is the H248 termination definition, or the naming convention of these H248 lines. It's important because the MGC needs to know how to reach those, how to reach each of the T1s into the system. There's also parameters for H248 that can be set, but again, we are sorting all of this to help you make it much easier. All the way on the bottom, you have the maintenance section, and then you have your, we'll talk about the three elements here. One is packages and licenses. So if you need to upload a new version or for any reason, a new license, then you can go here. So normally the units come out with a specific version. So you could change a version. So you can just go here and upload your new version. We'll show you that later. The logs here, I showed you already the audit logs, which are located here. So historical actions in the system. The report, or what we call sometimes the TV report, telco bridges report, it will capture logs for a specific time span, sorry. So if you want to see what happened yesterday at 3 p.m., so you can take logs from this period of time and you will get a report of this. You get a snapshot of the current configuration of the system. You get also all the logs from that time span. You get also a database backup. We take a database backup just to make sure that we understand the configuration you're currently in. And this is usually sent to the support team to help you figure out the problems. And we talked about the web users here. So the other elements here won't be needed for an H248 type environment with the media gateway control. Okay. You can have reduced menus on the left side. So if you, for example, don't use some of the options here that we have, you can just go into the configuration, click on the name of this configuration, and then you can remove, uncheck some of these elements here, and then they will just disappear from the left side panel. So it can be just uh, easier, just less information on the left side. So this is an optional element that you can do in your system. Here, I'm just reviewing what you need to configure for a H248 system. So we went through all these elements. Here, I'm just resuming this in a diagram here. So you have your system, which never changes, and your configuration. So of course, here it applies, all of these information applies to one configuration you have done in the system. In that configuration, you will have your hardware unit. So if it's a single system, it's going to be one device. If it's a 1+1 system, it's two devices. But all the other configuration applies to the two devices together. So there's two paths then you want to follow here. One is the IP path. So you will have the IP interfaces, which will be IP interfaces of the H248 and also the RTP streams, which will be configured in the network access points here. Okay. So you will have this here. If you go on the other side, you will have your T1s or C3, DS3 lines, which will be here. You can apply, once you have done this, you can apply the clocking to these line interfaces to make sure we are synchronized with the TDM network. Then you assign your T1s to the network access point and your RTP streams, right? Your RTP streams will also be configured here in the IP interfaces. So you can put this in the NAPs. Then you assign them to H248. And of course, H248, you have your MGC interconnection so that you can interoperate with the MGC here. The profiles, like I said, are optional. And when you allocate the network access point, you will just say which profile you are using right now on this system. So these are the steps you need to do for a H248 only, so a media gateway only function. For the signaling gateway configuration, well, you will have similar stuff to do. One is the system configuration and hardware unit. So these normally are always there and don't need to change any one of those. You will have your line interfaces, line services, and clocking that you need to configure. And then you will need to choose which MTP2 links or where are your MTP2 links in all of your OC3 configuration. Or it could be also on that specific bits port, right? On the bits port, you can choose one of the MTP2 link there. Then you will need to configure IP interface here. And in the IP interface, you will have the one that will be used for SIGTRAN. So you need to have your SIGTRAN IP interface configured here. And then you configure SCTP and your M2UA. And the only thing you need in the M2UA is to say, which MTP2 link am I joining here together? And what is the link ID of this MTP2 link? Okay. So normally when we configure a signaling gateway, we start with the TDM interfaces here because we need to have the MTP2 link to configure M2UA. So M2UA is configured second, and then it says which MTP2 link to use and which link ID this will be. Okay, and of course the M2UA link here adds information on where should I send this signaling information, and usually it's also to the media gateway controller. Okay, so this is for the configuration. Now I want to show the status, what you can get from the system, from the web interface. So if you click all the way up here on status, you can get a global view of everything that is configured in the system. So everything that is green usually is good. And when you have some colors like this, it means it's either not perfect or completely down. So it depends. Here you have a global view of the system, number of calls currently running, information on the physical devices that you have. If you have a 1+1 architecture, you can see it here. Host here is actually what we call the internal hosts, right? So the CentOS portion of the system that is controlling the H.248 and these things. So you can see the CPU usage, for example, memory and these things here. HA is also for the 1+1 configuration, but these are more for the applications. These are your T1, OC3, STM1 lines, MTP2 links, M2 UA links, IUA, clocking, network access point. For a H.248 configuration, this is not so useful. You will mostly look at the H.248 here to see the current status of your interconnect between the media gateway controller and the media gateway. If you click on the telecom hardware, you can see the devices that are here, what type of gateway this is. If it's a 1+1 system, you will see if they are ready and which one is currently active in the system. It doesn't really matter for operation. One could be active or the other. You won't see the difference. It's just to know. Here you can see which one is currently active. And you can see the current CPU usage, but you have to be careful. The CPU usage is of the telecom unit. So the telecom unit is the one handling the T1 and the RTP. And the signaling also, if you do the M2 UA signaling, you will see this here. For a media gateway application, I expect this to be very low. And the reason is that this CPU is only used to change the configuration of the interconnect at the TDM and RTP level. So when there's a change, there's some CPU usage being used, and this is affecting the changing the chips configuration on the device. But once the setup is done, then there's no more CPU being used because the link are all hardware based and it's device to device, physical device. So there's no processing usage being done here. So you will only see higher CPU usage if you have a lot of calls per second. Once the calls are set up, you won't see any CPU usage here. There's also other sensors. So if you click on the device, so if you click on the device, you can see other sensors. What is licensed on the device, the temperature, voltage. This is also the CPU usage. You can see it here. And then the states here, in some cases, they will ask to reboot the unit. It's quite rare, but sometimes it will ask to reboot to and I've seen this sometimes if, for example, you have a system that doesn't have any MTP2 link licensed and you want to add them later, then it cannot do this live. It will need to read the new license and then activate the MTP2 links. Okay? So, but let's say it's rare that you need to do this. Once you have configured your TDM line interface, you can see the status. So as you've seen on the first slide of status, you can go in the main status page and click on TDM line interface, or you can go here on any one of those elements and then just click on the status tab. So the default will be putting you on configuration tab, but you can just click here on status tab. And then you can see a global view of the quality of the line. And here you see the different levels. So for example, the OC3, STS1 layer, DS3 layer, and each of the T1s or DS1s here at this level, you can see the quality of the line. And we'll show later, you can get more details on all of these TDM line interfaces. For the IP interfaces, if you click on status, you have multiple options here. Let's say the most interesting one is the IP interface. So you will see what is the IP configured, which MAC address is assigned to this port, and then if it's available, and all of the interfaces on the device are at 1 gigabit per second. So you will see if here if it's good. In bondings here, you can see if which port is currently active on the device, and physical ports, you can see if the physical ports are up. So you can get global information on the IP interfaces. For MTP2, also, if you go in the status, you can see all of the MTP2 links. You can see if they are up or not. So see here, the MTP2 links are down and not aligned. So and you see here it has never been connected. So so this is of course not good. So you can quickly see here the status of your MTP2 links. Just a mention on the MTP2 links is that it's attached to an M2UA link. So the M2UA link needs to be up or communicating before the MTP2 link can come up. And here, talking about M2UA, we get into the status. And then you can see here the different links. Here we talked about the link ID or the interface identifier. It's the same thing. So this is a value that will reference the MTP2 link to the media gateway controller. If you click on H248 here and you click on status, you can see what is the IP being used for the media gateway controller and the port H248 port that is used. Plus, if it is up or unavailable, you can see this as well. So in all the system, you will have multiple information on each of the elements that you configure in the system. And you will be able to get the status. Here, I showed you only the high level, but we will show in each of the modules that we'll go through how deep you can go into the system to be able to be able to see the status and a lot of details. Okay. Overview. RESTful API overview, like I said, we will do that on the last or before last day, and we will show you that later. Okay, so let's start with some questions, if we had questions.
We had a couple. One just came in. Does your SIGTRAN code support encryption?
No, it does not.
And then the other ones. Oh, go ahead.
So the way we would do this is that if your SIGTRAN link goes to an external system, we would suggest to bridge it to a VPN connection between the two sites. Okay, so we can send the M2UA link to a router, and then you configure a VPN on there to be able to connect to a remote system. So then your link is protected in between the sites.
The other ones were pretty simple. Will customers have SSH root access to the Linux part of the system?
Yes. So of course we had many discussions on that over the years, but we still give root access to the devices. Of course, the user has to be careful when it goes into the system because you have access to everything, right? So then you need to make sure that you're doing some responsible commands on the system. We have all kinds of, and in the troubleshooting, I will show you all kinds of things we can do with the console connection. And we have other stuff on the wiki that shows you how to do stuff. But of course, if you try to do a delete all on the system, well, it's going to bring it down.
Are there validation checks when updating? Which I think you answered in your slides.
Yeah, correct. There is a validation. So when you do install a new version, when we do apply a new version, it's going to do a validation of the configuration. If it's not valid, it will say, no, you need to fix your configuration first before you can upgrade to the new version.
And the final one, is there a hard set limit in our web GUI for the number of configurations you can have? I've never run into one.
No, no. Here in our test environment, because of course we want to test many functions and we change the configuration a lot, we have at least 100 configurations into the system. I know that the web portal, I think it's over 50 configurations. It will say, it will give you a warning. So, and the warning will be just maybe some functions will take more time. For example, if you do a database backup, it takes all the configuration. So it's going to be a bit longer to get those configurations. But if you don't mind waiting a bit longer, it's fine. For the rest, I don't see any problems with that. As a general comment, I would say that if you have older configuration, which will know you will never be used, I would suggest to delete those old configurations.
All right, that's all the questions for today. I think it was a pretty simple one. Do you want me to do a little bit of a demo on the web GUI?
Yes, please. Of course, I want you to do a demo. Absolutely. Can you share? Excellent.
Yep, there we go.
Excellent.
Turn my dark mode off. So as Luc mentioned earlier, we've got a CFS, a Metaswitch system in our labs. So you can see my configuration right now is named Metaswitch Golden Config. And these are all the other non-activated configs that I have in there. I can see that by going into configurations. And you can see some of them have never been activated. They've just been made by copying things like Luc said. And my active one, if I wanted to go in and make changes, I could do it as simple as that. And then that'll take, depending on the size of the configuration, it'll take anywhere from 30 seconds to about 2 minutes. Another thing that's
but just when you do that, the system still is running.
Yep.
You have calls running, so this doesn't affect the current processing of the system.
No,
it's done as a background job on the system.
And it'll tie up the web server. So if you try another web page while it's doing that, all will get slow, but just the web server side, nothing with call control will be affected at all.
Yeah, exactly. So all of the web interface and these database processing are always low priority jobs. So yes, it could affect your viewing of the system, but it doesn't affect the rest.
And so you can see right here, I have this restore after training. This is a manual database backup like Luc was talking about before. When I go down here and I click create a new database backup, it's not just taking a backup of my active config. It's taking a backup of every single config I have on this device. So because I've already done that without worry, I could go in here and just delete all these configs and not be super worried about what they're doing and what I need to test. Because once I restore that after this training, all my configurations are going to go back there. And another thing I want to show you guys is a new configuration, and we can take a look at the validation. Because what's going to happen is my validation is going to fail as soon as I make this, because this is set up in a 1+1. If you see my hardware units, I've got that primary and that secondary right there. And if I don't add them all together, it's not going to like my configuration. So what we have here are called web profiles when you make a new configuration. And this is really just a quality of life, ease of use thing. When you disable one of these, it's going to remove the configuration options from the left. Nothing really happens on the back end of our system when you uncheck them. You can always go in and check them after you've made the configuration if you do need them again. But we're not going to need CAS in this demo. We're not going to need SCC, TCAP. We're not going to need ISUP. Is that correct?
But you need to have ISUP because of the MTP2 link.
The MTP2, right?
If you need MTP2, you will need to keep it. Yeah.
Yep, I will need ISUP then. We'll set that up, and then you can see my SIGTRAN settings as well. I'm not going to need V5 UA. I'm not going to need M3 UA. I'm not going to need M2PA. Make sure I say that one right.
Yes.
And I'm not going to need any of my SBC functionality. Won't need radius or lawful intercept or the file database or the audio prop. So this is going to make this list smaller and makes it really easier to navigate and go through.
I just show. Oh,
Sure.
I wanted to show just the advanced parameter. Quickly.
Okay. I can still expand it for a minute.
Yeah. Okay. No, these ones we would never change. It's okay.
I don't think I've ever
No.
touched them.
Don't need to. Okay. Very good.
So if I go in here and I find that September training, since I've added nothing, this one should pass, I believe, because it's got no concept of any of my hardware units. Like we were talking about before, our systems are 2 units in one. So you've got like a TDM board, a hardware unit, an adapter, a telco board. We've got a few names that we call it that communicates with the center system. So I haven't added that because this is a totally blank configuration.
Yeah. Show it on the left side there, up there. If you change the, no, up there, up there. If you change it there, you'll see that there's nothing inside.
So if I switch what I'm configuring here, you'll see that whole section of hardware units just disappeared. And those drop downs that I have on my Metaswitch Golden config, they're both there. So the first step in setting up anything like in setting up a new unit, anything but one of our SBCs, is you're going to need to add those hardware units. And that's pretty much as simple as we have this. But
one thing, Joshua, is when there's a new device that is shipped, there's a default config that is created with your hardware unit, which is always there. So if you want to add the other one, well, if you want to have a 1+1 system, when you add the second system, it's going to be automatically added as well. So it's really only when we create a new configuration from scratch that we would need to do that.
Right. And you can see I still have on here this config 1, which is the shipping config, essentially.
Correct.
It's our default one name.
The default one.
So when I jump in there, you can see that I've got this 1+1 group configured, and you can see the names of my hardware units are a little bit different than what I call them. I'm calling them primary and secondary. The shipping config just calls them by their serial numbers.
Yeah, this can be changed, right? You can just modify the name. Yeah.
So we to skip that step, one of the things we do recommend is for customers to leave that config 1 on there. And then when they're starting from a new config, instead of starting from a totally blank one, copy that shipping config, and it saves you just a little bit of time. Darren asked a question while we were looking at the web profiles. Is that a session border controller option? And is that not needed in a VoIP deployment? It's not necessarily not needed in a VoIP deployment, but it's not going to be needed in an H248 deployment.
Yeah, and what we're doing. Okay, let me just explain what we have to be careful here. It's the same interface that we have for the media gateways, the signaling gateways, and our SBCs. So there could be some options that appear sometime in the web interface which talks about SBCs, but for a TMG or TSG device, media gateway, signaling gateway, you don't have any SBC options, even if they are shown here and there. Okay, so the SBC option will only apply to the Pro SBC that we have, but it's the same interface, right? So it could be confusing.
Right. And our media gateways can perform as back-to-back user agents, but they don't have all the functionality of the SBC that our SBC does. So
correct, but there is, let me just explain, you touched a good point. The IP interfaces that are configured on the system are only open, there's a built-in firewall, there's only open to the IP interface you configure here in the configuration. And for the RTP ports as well, so if you open an RTP port, they are all opened live, right? Even if you go in the RTP port range.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah, that you were there. So you see there's a port range of 20,000 to 40,000 there. They're not all open on the system. Only when they are used will they be opened. So this protects the system somewhat. So it's not a full SBC, but it has some kinds of protection on the system.
And so right here, you can see on my orange tab, I'm now in a different unit that is not set up in a H248 environment. So I wanted to show you here that where we have what we call these network access points, and these are essentially the ingress and the egress points of our gateway. If a call is going to go out or a call is going to come in, it's going to go through that. In an H248 setting, I'm back on the green one, so I'm back on the H248. It's really simple because I'm just giving my media gateway controller control of everything. So I make one for my RTP, and I make one for my TDM, and then the media gateway controller has full control over it. In a non-H248 setting, like Luc was talking about, as far as there is protection because everything by default is closed. And when I go in and I create this NAP, I'm telling it what to listen to. So I have it bound down here to a SIP transport server, and that is going to be my source and listening IP. So what I'm doing is I'm opening port 5062 there because that's what that one is named, giving it permission to use this whole range of RTP ports. But like Luc said, until there's a SIP call that needs the RTP ports, they're not going to be open. And then this, go ahead.
And then you make me think of something else right now. If you go in, go back to IP interfaces on the other system, and then on the RTP range again. Oh, no, the IP interfaces, stay there. So you see there, you have some services. You have fixed management, SIGTRAN, RTP, okay? The ones that are named RTP and SIGTRAN are not connected to the CentOS system. So even if you try to hack in there, there's nothing, right? You get to another OS, which has no meaning, no chance of being hacked, right? So the RTP and SIGTRAN will be there. The ones that are H248 or management, then these will go to the CentOS. So these need to be protected somehow.
Paul asked a question that I'm not positive on the answer. Can the system detect rogue RTP streams? Would the Toolpack engine even report or be aware of, or sorry, the Toolpack sysmanager of RTP coming at it on a port that's not open?
So you don't see it from the web interface, but if you go in the logs, you will see if you get some events. But okay, so it depends how it comes. If it's a RTP port that comes to you and it's on a wrong port, you won't even see it because it's blocked right there at the entrance of the system. So if it's a port that is not configured on our system, it's going to be gone. If it's a port that already exists on the system and you have two streams coming in, the system will automatically block the ports, right? Because you can't have, it counts how many packets it receives. If you receive too many packets, it's going to block that port. This, you will get some logs in the system. If the rogue RTP port comes out of our system and goes outside, if there is a port closed information, an ICMP, destination unreachable, coming back, this will also be reported in our system. So it's not, let's say, very clear from the web portal, but in the logs, you can definitely see if something is wrong.
And so to follow up on what Luc was saying a moment ago, this is a SSH session to the H248 gateway. So as you can see, I do have root. Let me make my font a little bit bigger so it's easier for you guys to see. That didn't work. And so did I screw this up? It looks like I did.
A little bit, but it's okay. It's okay.
Let me open a new session. I'm not sure what I applied there that was causing that error. All right, there we go. So maybe that's not the easiest way to see, but one thing I wanted to point out here is that the RTP addresses from the web interface are not going to be shown up in this IP address when I search on the CentOS system. So those SIP and those RTP ports are not even going to be on my CentOS server. They're not open. They're only to our telco board, whereas H248 is open on the CentOS What else, Luke? H248 SIG trans all on the TDM.
Yeah, correct.
Management, of course, your web interface is going directly to the SIP interface. So you'll see your management interface, you'll see your H248 interface, but you won't see the RTP ports.
Correct.
And
And the RTP ports usually always go out to the network, while the H248 and the SIGTRAN are usually either local or you need to protect them with a VPN.
And so here is like our base control panel for more advanced debugging. When you normally deploy a system, and if you know all your configuration settings and you don't have any troubles, you're not really even going to need to SSH into this box. You can go right to the web GUI, you can set everything up, and you can see all the statuses of your links coming up. But if we're debugging something a little bit more specific, as I mentioned to you guys before, this environment is a 1+1, like we were talking about, that high availability. So you see my yellow, this right here is actually this 18875 is the other CentOS system running on the 1+1. So the 1+1 has full redundancy. There are 2 CentOS systems and 2 real-time operating system telco boards. And you can see the list of applications that we use. The green ones are the one that's active. So if I went in here, I don't know if I just quit it, it will be enough time for the switch over. So
well, we can do that later, Joshua.
Okay.
We're jumping the gun here. This is we're in the troubleshooting section, right?
Yeah, you're right. You did start mentioning it, so I had to.
I know. It's okay.
So let me go back to the training that we're working on here, and I'm going to add in my my hardware units. So the name, as Luke mentioned, can be anything that you want it to be. That's just custom, but that serial number right under it is important and needs to come directly from your hardware unit.
Yes, because the serial number is being recognized on the network. So you need to put the right serial number, and when it detects the telecom portion, it's going to say, "Oh yes, this is my device."
And I don't actually know what happens here if you select the wrong one, Luke. But here it's asking me what kind of TDM lines are on my hardware unit. What would happen if I select the wrong one?
I'm not sure. Normally, you know.
So I'm just going to call this one the primary for our ease of use. And I've got an OC3 STM1 connection on here. So I'm going to go ahead and add that in. And if I try to activate this, I believe at this current state, it will fail because I haven't set up the 1+1 like it's expecting. But let's double check. And you can see here, it's a little bit different than on my 1+1 setting because it's only checking with the applications on one CentOS server. Whereas in my 1+1, when I validated this one, it was going through both servers to check everything. And that's why it's significantly longer here. You can see the serial numbers of the servers differentiating them.
So all the system is checking all the configuration to make sure it's good.
Yep. You talked about licensing a little bit. Should I share this?
Yeah, well, this is easy. Just upload the license.
And one thing that's helpful to remember is our web page is pretty static. So you've got your navigation panel on the left, and then on almost every page, you have these 2 tabs at the top here that are configuration and status. So if I go into something like my IP interfaces, which are pretty easy and straightforward to understand, we can see my actual configuration. I can go in here and I can make changes if need be. But then if I switch that over, it's going to give me a more detailed look than just the overview of the status page. We do have the status page where it kind of shows you a dashboard of everything. And because some of my switches, my high availability is not super happy, I need that other unit to get rebooted and putting some of my actually my H248 lines are out of service because my remote end. So you can see my M2 UA link and the peer that I've got connected directly to my Metaswitch. And depending on what you're looking at specifically, we've got different status levels going down to 0 where you can get a little bit more.
Okay, maybe show just, for example, the MTP2 configuration on the left side. Yeah. Just show one example, click on one. And so
So
to
each
configure,
one, and as we go through the configuration, I'll show you guys all this and you'll understand my naming schemes a little bit, but this basically is a specific DS1. It's on my first DS3, which is why the name's so long, because I'm in an STM1 encapsulation. Then whether I'm using ITU or ANSI, and then my DPC length, which is always going to be 888 on an ANSI setup, and then I can specify which time slot that it's coming in on. And if I go to this HSL, which is the high-speed link, it's going to default to use all time slots. Anything specific you want to show here?
no. Just wanted to show that's when you do this, you do save, and your MTP2 link is ready to be. So
remember to activate the configuration.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you can see that when I drill down here, like I said before, this configuration and this status tab here, I can make changes. But if I wanted to see specific information or errors or things like that on my MTP2 link, I could do that here.
And just this is an example of an apply state, right? We have here data link state. So to do some tests, we can disable the link here. And when we do this, then if you look at the bottom, you have apply states here, right? And this will apply immediately on the system. Doesn't wait for the activation configuration.
Yep. Apply states is different than the save button. The save button is going to put it into the configuration, wait for you to activate, and apply state's going to happen right now. So like if I went on my entire OC3 interface, I could also bring that one down. Once I go to the status page there, I could turn the laser off essentially to signal a full loss of signal there. And if I did that right away, it would come down. And to verify that, this is the unit that it's connected to. The STM1 is connected to another one of our units. And you can see all my MTP2, my MTP3, my ISUP, my TDM, my ISDN. They all went red right away because that error went down. So here you have the refresh every, self-explanatory. Just if you need to monitor something, you can tell it to refresh every 5 seconds. I can come over here and I can put that laser back on, hit the apply states.
And it's effective immediately. So that's the important thing to understand.
Yeah, every time you see that apply state button, it's not going to wait for activate configuration because these generally are debugging and troubleshooting tools. And there we go. Already my TDM lines are back green.
Okay, I think there's just 2 small things left to show. One is in backups. We showed already backups, but if I just want you to download, click on download any one of them.
All right, I'll download the one I made today.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
I've got a local copy of it.
And then it will say where you want to put this this file. And you see it's a SQL file. So this can be reused on this system, so reloaded as another file on the system, or it can be used on another unit, completely different unit, and it would have exactly the same configuration as this unit, except for the management IP to reach the device.
Okay. And this one, even with how many configs I have, that database file was only 2.8 megs.
Yeah, no, these are small files. The other thing I wanted to show is the web users.
Yes.
I don't know if you have users in this system. Oh, a lot of users.
I do. The R&D team, they never use any of the web users they make for themselves. They always
that's not nice.
It's not.
Change the root password. You will see they will start using it.
You're right. You're right. So here you can see a lot of people on our team have their own use here, and we've got a couple different user groups. And like I said, most of the time this is configuration and status. There are about 3 pages where it's a little bit different, and here would be one. The web user groups on these tabs is going to bring you over here. I didn't make this monitor, so I'm not sure, but as I guessed, it's all It's all read only.
It's
so-
read, but you have one that is no access. So if you log in as supervisor, you won't see any V5 UA on the
It would be completely removed
Yeah.
from the left side. You wouldn't be able to see anything there. We're not using it in this setup, so I don't think it matters.
So that's it. I think it's the rest is self-explanatory.